Why did EverQuest fans hate World of Warcraft when it came out? Was the hate for good reason? I grew up watching my dad play EverQuest 1 in the early 2000s, and I eventually got into it myself. It was one of the first games of its type, MMORPGs. A 3D open world where you can team up with other people to take down monsters and do quests. An emphasis, though, on the teaming up with others. EverQuest was the king of the MMO genre until 2004. World of Warcraft came out, and everything changed. I remember the amount of hate that EQ players spat at WoW. It's a game for kids, it's dumbed down, WoW sucks. That was the majority of what I remember. But those aren't good answers. Why did EverQuest players actually hate WoW? I wanted to know. And I took this attitude to heart. I never played World of Warcraft because I always thought it was a terrible game. But I now don't feel it's fair to judge something until you try it. I'm going to play World of Warcraft for the first time and make my own opinion. Was I wrong about hating WoW? I also asked some members in the EverQuest community how they felt about World of Warcraft. Why did they hate it, if at all? I don't understand the expansions yet, but I picked a server that's on Wrath of the Lich King Classic. I heard it's a really good expansion to start out with. I'm just coming from EverQuest 2, so I'm seeing a huge graphical downgrade, but it's way better than EverQuest 1. There's more animations, it flows smoother, and you actually sheathe your weapons. It's nice. The quests don't hold your hand as much as I was expecting. You have to actually read the descriptions to know where to go. And the map doesn't do all the guesswork like when I played Elder Scrolls Online years ago. But I really wish it was the default. When you get a quest, like the quest giver will give out all the text, it just takes forever to read it all out. And I didn't know there was an option to speed through it until day 3. It's definitely an on-rails experience. It does not throw you to the wolves like EQ1, and I can see how that made WoW much more accessible, why newer MMOs chose to copy WoW. WoW seems to do a better job than even EQ2 Vanilla, which released just a bit before WoW in 2004, a direct competitor. EQ2 stops guiding you with quest chains around the 20s. It's on you to figure out what to do. But it might just be design differences. EverQuest core design was more towards grouping for experience, whereas WoW appears to be more about doing quests for experience. And I see how this solo-friendly questing system was a brilliant advancement of the genre. My most fun time ever playing EverQuest 2 was when they did it themselves. They did it in their 4th expansion, Kunark, and you do these long quest chains solo to get geared up and max level. Let's talk about how some EverQuest players feel about WoW. I got these comments from the official EverQuest forums. WoW chose a cartoon-like stylized aesthetic that grated on many EQ players who far preferred the Western fantasy aesthetic that EverQuest was aiming for. WoW's artists chose their aesthetic because it would age well, and they had a good point. Then you have the more hand-holding approach WoW took with the quest here symbols over NPC heads, and the fact they built in a single-player path through the game's levels that many EQ players saw at the time as an inferior approach. Personally, I quite enjoyed WoW, but what it lacked was the community EQ had built through hardship and adversity, and that heavy dependence on other players to get pretty much anything done, which worked well when all the servers were heavily populated and became a sore point when they started depopulating quickly. It's really difficult to move on from an MMO that feels comfortable. I like WoW as a game, but I never really got settled into such a massive community. EQ is smaller and easier to find and make friends. WoW is in many ways a better game overall than EverQuest, but EQ was 5 years established when WoW launched. Many people stayed with EQ because they had long relationships there. Some stayed for the higher difficulty, some stayed because although WoW had better graphics, they weren't very realistic graphics. EQ2 also launched at the same time as WoW, and also pulled a chunk of EQ's player base. EQ2 offered the graphics that WoW and EQ1 did not, and the effect was significant as felt by the difficulty of finding public groups. EQ had 2 bad and overtuned expansions in a row, which definitely sent some people looking at the new shiny toy on the market. And at this point, EQ was still a pretty slow-paced game compared to other stuff on the market. Classes were starting to get more abilities, but most combat still boils down to pull a mob here and auto attack it until it's dead. Heal the tank. Raid mechanics have gotten more complex in previous expansions, but it's a slow process and some people actually don't want more complex mechanics. They want the simplistic gameplay that EQ rolled out from the get-go. A lot of players liked the slower style combat as it allowed them to be more social with their groups, chatting, getting to know people, etc. So transitioning to a game like WoW that expected nearly every class to be button mashing, constantly moving around in dungeons, and generally more Twitch style gameplay was just a big adjustment that some didn't choose to make. Art style is an obvious one. It's a stylistic choice, but one that turns some people off. I've heard countless times about how WoW is a kiddie game because of the way it looks, just from people who've never played it. But I compare it to something like Team Fortress 2 and Counter-Strike. Both are first-person shooters, but one goes for more realism, and the other is over-the-top cartoony. Both are great games, but some may find them unpalatable. I actually liked WoW when it came out, as did most everyone I played EQ with, and what I and many of my guildmates at the time didn't like, and just couldn't get past, was the way people that played the game acted. The sense of community and social aspect we were used to with EQ just wasn't there. Players were inherently antisocial, relying more on the semi-automated systems of the game instead of chatting about things. If that was different, I might have actually kept playing for longer than the initial luster. For my wife and I, there was no sense of accomplishment in WoW because gear was so much easier to obtain. The second thing we did not like was the lack of community feel that EQ had and still has. Without a guild or a lot of good friends, EQ was a real struggle. And in the same situation in WoW, it wasn't a problem at all. So the urge to find a group of friends just was not there. Third, we felt WoW was a player versus player game that had player versus environment added onto it. With what I mean, a player versus player game needs classes to be balanced against each other, which for us made the game very dull. In a full player versus environment game, you get several classes that have very specific skill sets which are almost useless against other players, but very important against the environment. And lastly, the split between Alliance and Horde really turned us off in two ways. One, it basically meant when you played on alt on the other side, you could not group with your friends all of a sudden. And two, because making two sides in the game leads to childish stuff, like annoying the other side or killing quest mobs and things. I enjoyed both, but I currently only play EverQuest. WoW was nice because I could level without a group, but really the two shouldn't even be compared because they're basically different genres at this point. WoW played more like a single player game for about 99% of the content before endgame, and EverQuest has always been grouping 100% of the way through. Let's talk about the sponsor of this video. Raid Shadowlet. No! Ever wanted something that poops in a box and stinks up the whole house? Wrecks your carpet and blankets by throwing up hairballs on them? Doesn't want affection when you want to give it. Also gives you terrible allergy problems. You should get yourself a cat. If you get a cat within the next 24.9 seconds using my discount code BIGCHUNGUS, you can get 87% off your next bathwater purchase. Buy now. What are y'all doing? The game clock goes slower. Like a day in EverQuest is maybe 1 to 2 hours long, but a day in WoW seems like it's just as long as real life. The consider system is also different. The color that you see when you target the mob, WoW's color immediately shows you whether the mob is hostile or not. In EQ, the colors reflect what level the monster is in relation to you, so red being much higher. I always thought I was fighting stuff like 10 levels higher than me, and it kind of threw me off at first. And the auto attack system definitely reminds me a lot of EQ1. Most of my damage seems to come from it, but that just might be playing Paladin. I got into the fishing minigame. It's a nice distraction from the regular game, and I really wish EQ had this. The trade skill system, though, it seems to be like a cross between EQ1 and EQ2. You farm nodes for trade skill items like EQ2, but the extent of crafting is just using pop-up menus like EQ1. So I really feel like EQ2 did this much better by making trade skilling its own minigame, where you pick a class and level up in it. You're not trying to arbitrarily raise some skill points so you can buy the next level up. I definitely understand the term WoW clone now. The only newer MMO I played is Elder Scrolls Online, and I'm seeing where 80% of that game's systems are from. Go from area to area, doing all the quests to get gear and level up. ESO is just a faster and has more flexible classes than WoW. When starting out, it's actually kind of hard to play WoW because of it. The best way I can explain it is this. I like Fallout 3 and New Vegas much more than Fallout 4, but it's really hard to play 3 and New Vegas because of all the quality of life features that 4 implemented. WoW seems like it was the best game in 2004, but it's kind of hard going back after playing MMOs made years later that improved upon the design, although not dramatically so. But I see how EverQuest couldn't compete. In WoW, you log on and immediately start playing. In EverQuest, you log on and hope to start playing. You gotta find a group so you can start playing. And sometimes you can't find a group, so you spend 2 hours doing nothing. Not fun. And it's why I box a lot now. I'll have a link for where I argue about the pros and cons of boxing. That'll be in the comments and description. Now, I did get into a rough patch around level 14 where the monsters in Westfall were exorbitantly difficult to kill. It was hard to do the quests I had, so I looked up what to do, and it was suggested to check out other starting zones. I didn't know it wasn't enough to just grind out experience in one zone. Didn't like how long it took to get from point A to point B, but I appreciate how WoW makes you explore the whole zone. I also appreciate how you have to earn fast travel by talking to Griffin Masters. After doing several zones, I see how this game is just loaded with content. It seems like way more money, time, and thought went into this game than EQ. Now the boat system, I have mixed feelings. I kind of wish you had an ocean zone to pass through, like EQ1's Ocean of Tears or Timber Steep. But at the same time, it was a terrible wait for those boats. WoW's loading screen ruins the immersion of this giant world, but I also appreciate how boats don't make you wait 30 minutes to get back. But what I will say is WoW appears to be less social. By the time I got to level 10 in EQ, I would have been in 2 to 3 groups. Not the case with WoW because there was no need. But I got really lucky. I got randomly hit up to join a guild, and they set up a group and asked me to tag along. I was their discount ban healer. I heard horror stories about how this community is very mean to new players, but it wasn't the case with this guild group. They were pretty understanding. It was actually the most fun I had the whole time playing this game. It's this instance dungeon crawl, and there's a lot of care that went into the design of this place, the different sections and the boss fights. I really like the dungeon crawls over the EQ1 static camp, where you just sit at one spot, pull mobs to it, and don't ever leave. It gets really monotonous, and it sucks in retrospect. These are comments from the Project 1999 forums. It's an emulation server of EverQuest's early days, before convenience features were added. Hardcore gameplay, like corpse runs for instance. How did they feel about WoW? WoW was direct competition at the time, so a lot of players did not want to see the EQ community bleed out to WoW. On top of that, it kind of took the attention off of EQ and shifted it to WoW as the main MMO at the time. Honestly, most EQ players didn't hate WoW. WoW was extremely popular amongst EQ players, but what WoW did? It decimated EQ. EverQuest publisher had stopped sharing population numbers by that point, very likely because they knew how embarrassing it would be. But let me put it this way, WoW came out in November 2004, and just a few months later, 18 EverQuest servers closed. WoW destroyed EQ's population. But to be fair, it wasn't all WoW's fault. The publisher shot themselves in the foot with bad expansions and the simultaneous EQ2 release. It further fractured the player base. It's hard to say vanilla WoW as it existed 2004 to 2007 wasn't an outright superior experience to 99% of EverQuest. To me, it's only on replayability where it falls short. Once you've mastered the mechanics of WoW and the content, there's less depth and less variety compared to EQ. It's shorter, more condensed, and more on rails, but I don't think any of that was really a factor when you and everyone else was starting fresh and blind in 2004. It's hard to overstate this impact and how it was experienced compared to the competition. In retrospect, I'm kind of surprised by these forum posts. Most comments were positive towards WoW, and the ones who were completely negative didn't really have any good reasons. I question whether they even played the game after what I've personally seen. Now this is a really good take from WoW's forums. I remember when WoW came out in 2004, all of us in my guild on EQ made fun of it. When we heard you can get to max level within a month and a half hard play, we were laughing about it, saying that's easy mode. Then we heard there's no death penalty, every class gets soloed to max level, and all raids and dungeons were instanced. Easy mode. Little did I see at the time that the mechanics I thought made EQ a better game actually weren't true. The easy and casual mechanics of WoW made the game way more accessible for all gamers. EQ2 launched and you basically had to rebuild your computer to play it. WoW could run on a potato, and looking back, its simplicity and ease of getting into content is what I think killed EQ the most. Now EQ2 did split the player base a bit, but I'd wager that WoW's accessibility had the greater impact in killing EQ1's reign. And as I scrolled through the WoW forums, I found concerns that WoW retail is turning into EverQuest. EQ at the time was making the same poor decisions. There was an inordinate amount of grind, and the barrier to entry was very, very high. You could arguably say they were constructing the esports min-max culture of the time. And this was pre-bloat, before they jam-packed system on top of system. But they had the mentality that they were too big to fail, and then came WoW, a streamlined version of EQ with a big budget and lots of ambition. WoW retail, in its current state, is making many of the same mistakes. It's what's driving people away, just like EverQuest did in 2004. After playing for a few weeks, I feel WoW is outright a better game, as it should have been. It had years to study what EQ did wrong and a budget to make it happen. But I do have two resentments towards WoW. The first being from a content creator perspective. I feel that EverQuest gets overshadowed. It was a critical step in MMO history. Nobody knew what a 3D MMO was until EverQuest. Nobody knew how to make a 3D MMO until EverQuest. EverQuest proved the commercial viability of this genre. It brought it to life. It became the benchmark for do's and don'ts of game design. WoW's developers played, helped create, and drew inspiration from EQ. My complaint is EverQuest never gets credit for how much impact it's made. WoW would not exist without EverQuest, and I feel like the biggest MMO content creators, I get the sense they don't understand how significant EQ was. Mind you, it's probably ignorant. It's a hard game to get into in 2022, and also maybe it was just before their time, but EQ is neglected in a way that bothers me. It's why I made my 4-part adventure series that I'll leave a link to in the top comment description. If you want to see what playing this game was like, check that out. But let's take off the YouTuber hat. Okay, so talking from a gameplay perspective, WoW's solo-friendly design is a two-edged sword. It was the most accessible MMO, but it had to push aside one of the most important features that made MMOs unique. What made them so fun for me personally? MMOs are meant to be played with other people and friends. They're not meant to be played alone 99% of the time. WoW's design and influence on later titles split this genre into two, in my opinion. What we call MMOs now are mostly online single-player games. And there's something about playing on a team, being a part of a community, being relied upon, that's much more engaging gameplay than an endless quest grind alone. The people who didn't leave EQ to play WoW, this is reason number one they gave. And I see how EQ2 was an attempt to make a modern and accessible MMO like WoW, but still push grouping more than solo play. I can see someone saying this, "You're wrong, I team up with people when I raid, it's just as social in WoW." No, not at all. Social interactions in a group of 5 to 6 are way better than raiding with 20 plus people, even in EverQuest. In a group, you're way more important, you carry more weight, you make a bigger impact. I've never been able to use the full extent of my class in a raid. I've never been needed as much in a raid. I've mostly just been a warm body that goes through the motions for 2 to 4 hours. Grouping was always more fun. Raiding just burns me out. And the brutal world of classic EverQuest forced players to come together in a way that's largely missing in newer games. And my last gameplay complaint is class design. Almost all MMOs are pure Trinity games: tank, healer, and damage. EverQuest is one of the few exceptions, and it's sad to see that WoW did not copy this. Individual monsters in EverQuest are crazy hard to kill alone, if not impossible. You need help. And oftentimes, they'll be clustered in packs, where if you aggro one, they all come. Guaranteed death. EverQuest had 2 extra dedicated roles that were just as important as tank, healer, or GPS. You needed pullers, special classes that had tools to split apart packs. You needed crowd controllers, special classes that could perma-stun ads when a pull went bad, which it did a lot. My favorite class being the Bard. Bards couldn't tank, heal, or do damage, so why play them? Because they pulled well, they did crowd control, and made every class in the group 25% better. They did 2 important jobs out of the 5 roles in EQ: pulls and crowd control. It's a very unique playstyle that's been left behind in future games. Kinda sad it's gone. But I feel if a new MMO had the accessibility of WoW combined with the positive social interaction of EverQuest, it could be the WoW killer everyone's been waiting for, but I have no clue how to make it. It seems like accessibility for solo play and encouraging player interaction can't exist together. It's almost as if there's 2 separate types of MMO now, like social and then solo MMOs. But the money is overwhelmingly in solo play. I enjoy playing WoW solo, but it got a lot better when I joined a guild, kind of like what happened in my EQ2 review. I didn't enjoy the game until I got into a good guild. I was wrong to hate World of Warcraft though. It is better than EverQuest in most ways, but EverQuest still holds a place in my heart for the few things that it does do better. Just out of nostalgia alone, it is my favorite game, but there are better games than it.